Hello there, this is the first in a two-part video. As usual, we'll review some old clubs, delve into a bit of their history, and then in part two I'll play a few holes with them. I understand that not everyone will want to watch the whole video, so here are some time checks in case you want to skip ahead. Right, let's start by reviewing the solitary wood that I'm going to play. This is a probably 1950s wood, I would think. As you can see, it's a coated steel shaft, enamel paint. It's a persimmon head with a black insert, 4 screws. There's no markings on the top. That's primarily because I've restored this one and I sanded the head down. If we look on the sole, we can see who it's by though. We've got the flag of Forgan there, and it's the deluxe model from their range. If we move down to the shaft band, we can see that it's a True Temper Rocket, which was roughly 1954 to 59. I think this is the original leather grip. It's a 2 wood, we can see the number 2 there. That's the wood that I'll be using. Let's move on to the irons. I've got on the table 2, 4, 6 and 8. We can actually see these because the number is stamped on the back of the club as well. That's the easiest one to see it on. That one's got the number 2 there if I catch it in the light. Anybody that plays Hickory clubs will probably also recognise the pipe mark there and the writing on the bottom there, which says TS St A registered trademark, and that stands for Tom Stewart St Andrews, who was one of the greatest ironhead manufacturers of the Hickory era. He produced literally millions of club heads and sold those to the club manufacturers or the club finishers, which was at that time more often than not club professionals who would buy clubs from Tom Stewart, then they would finish them off in their own shops. But these are a later set. I'll bring them down. We can see that they're an enamel coated steel shaft. They're not same colour ferrule there. And on this particular one we've got the name Frank Jowle, who was a professional from the 1930s. He had some success and he also came, I think, 3rd in the Open in 1955. But let's come back to these clubs now and have a look at those. You can see it's a lined face. These are what I call fanned lines in that they follow the shape of the head, so they're not strictly parallel, which would incidentally make them illegal in the conformity part of the rules of golf these days. Lines have to be parallel. Quite a reasonable size hosel, and the actual profile of the club is one that I'm going to talk about in a bit more detail in a moment, but it's a bit of weight at the bottom, a bit of weight at the top, and a sort of a depression there. What else can I say about it? If we look on the sole, we've just got the club number. Bring the shaft round itself. This is a fairly early one, so there's not a shaft band on it, but it does have some stamping there. Whether I'll be able to get that in focus or not, I'll probably take a photograph of it later on. But it says True Temper and a number 3, and we've got an M there, which tells us it's a medium flex. So that's the 2 iron. In the set I have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and the most lofty club is this one, which is the 8 iron. So that's the irons, but I did say that I wanted to discuss this particular style. So I'm going to remove these 3 clubs and talk about this style, because it was a style that became extremely popular. Let me just get an old club from the Hickory era and I can better explain what I'm talking about. Right, I'm back with a Hickory club now. It's a Tom Stewart, and we can see there, just as I mentioned previously, the trademark, the pipe trademark and the writing underneath it are identical on both of these clubs. But coming back to this club, this is what most Hickory clubs were like. It's a true blade, there's no weighting on there at all, or no movement of weighting. It's just a thicker sole than it is the top of the blade. Very simple design. If we look at the face on this one, we can see that it also has the fanned lines that I was talking about. There we go. So the design of this club, apart from the back, is very similar to the one that we're looking at. And if I then bring in another club, again we've got the fanned lines. We can see that this is a steel shafted club. We've got a bit of a ferrule there. It's a pinned head, and once again, by fortune or good luck, whatever, it's a Tom Stewart club. So again, we've got that same style. This has just come straight over from the Hickory era. If we look at the hosels, we can just see that whereas the Hickory one is very wide to allow the Hickory shaft to go in there, it needed to be fairly thick to be strong enough, being made of wood, whereas the steel shaft one, it's very narrow, and that's because the steel shaft didn't need to be so thick. But as far as the club head goes, it's identical in style. And that was how Hickory clubs, some appeared with flanges on the soles, some had diamond backs with sort of attempts to create or centre the weighting behind the ball. But around the early to mid 1930s, we started to see a move to this type of design where we've got a much more prominent flange on the sole, and then we gradually saw weight appearing at the top as well. Now that became almost, if you like, the model club through the 1930s and into the 1940s and early 1950s. But I've got here quite a selection that I'm going to bring onto the table now of clubs from that sort of period, and we'll see that they follow very much that design. So there we've got a Stewart club there, and here we've got very similar design. This one actually has the Tom Stewart pipe cleat mark again, but we can also see that it says Spalding. So this was produced after Spalding had taken over the Tom Stewart forge. Whether this one came before that or after that, I'm not 100% sure. It doesn't say Spalding, which might suggest that it came before, or it might just be that Spalding allowed the Stewart forge to produce clubs just under its own name, whereas with the Henry Cotton one, they wanted to be associated with Henry Cotton, so they included the Spalding name again. Next up, I'm just going to bring these out at random, and here we have a Tom Octoloni club. Nice name on this one. It's in. And we can see Tom Octoloni, St Andrews. So another St Andrews maker. If we look on the front, we can see it's a dot face club. Another coated shaft, brown painted shaft. We can see that this one says Whippy. Whether you can read that or not, I'm not sure. But the flex on that is Whippy. So if we look at those two together, we can see that they are extremely similar, even down to the dot faces, although the pattern on this one is slightly different to the pattern on this one. But we'll put that one there. Let's bring out another one. What have we got this time? Gradage. Look at the toe profile. Not quite as pronounced as the other one, but it's still there. Bit of weight at the top, bit of sole weight, the Gradage name, and rustless. So that's 4. And these would be, I would think all of these are produced in the post-war, so 1940s or 1950s. We've then got a Fred Stevens. I don't know who made this, but if we look at the end there, we've got again sole weight and a bit of a bulge at the top there. Fred Stevens matched set. I think Fred Stevens was a Liverpool professional. Ferrule on it, dot face, and the shaft on this one says True Temper and the number 3. So whether that suggests that the 3 was the earlier type of shaft, I don't know. We've also got M there for medium flex. So that one's very similar to the Frank Jowle Tom Stewart one that we looked at. Let's see what we have next. And here we have a George Nicol. This is a pin cracker model, and it was produced for Robinson and Company, Singapore and Kuala Lumpur. We've got the Hand of Friendship cleat mark there, and this is a bore through hosel. This one is, I'm pretty sure that this is a 1930s club. Again, we've got that sole and a little bit of a bulge there. They're not as pronounced as some of the other ones, but again, it's that same design. So we'll put that one there. Running out of space fast. Next up we have the flywheel cleat mark, which tells us it's by Cannon Taylor. And the name would be the professional's name there, R.W. Wilson. I'm not sure what the VB or BV is. Rustless, hand forged. And again, we've got the VB there. Number 5 iron on this one. If we look at the toe profile, nice flange, bit of a bulge at the top there. So that's another one in that same fashion. It's a True Temper number 3 medium flex. So I'm beginning to think that that is the earlier design with the number on it, which would say that the Frank Jowle is earlier than the Henry Cotton. See what we've got next. It's another one in that style. So as you can see, the development, they reached this style of club, and it just seemed to be very popular, and it was used by every man and his dog really. This one, I can't really read that. It looks like A.H. Elkin own model. So again, that would be the professional. There isn't a manufacturer's mark on this one. Lovely big brown hosel on it. This one's got a light shaft on it. Original leather grip. Let's put that one back and reach for the next one. We are nearly at the end of the clubs that I brought now, so fear not. It's not going to go on forever. And here we've got another George Nicol one, and it's the famous pin splitter model. We've got the George Nicol signature there. This is the Z pin splitter. Hand of Friendship cleat mark. Lined face. What's the face on this one? Did you look at that? Yes, a dot face. I think that one was as well. Yes, a dot face. So most of them are dot faces. This one does have a chrome shaft on it though, chrome steel. So this one again would be with the True Temper rocket shaft band there. It would be mid to late 1950s. So that's that one. And we've then got one more to go. And here we've got a Glenfarg, which I think I've featured this club before. If we look at the end, this one's got quite a pronounced sole weight on it, but again we've got that bulge there, a little bit of top weighting. The shaft on it, another brown enamel shaft, and this one says medium, True Temper medium, and it does look a little bit of a later one, although it's still a punch dot face with some frosting on this one. So there we go, we've got 10 clubs there, all very much of a muchness when it comes to the design. I'll bring up a couple of photographs where I've grouped them all together so that you can see the profiles. But yes, that I thought it was just quite interesting how this design hung around and was used by so many different manufacturers. I finished the Frank Jowle irons at the number 8, so I'm going to need something, although the 8 is about 50 degrees of loft, I think it was very much a pitching wedge. I am going to need a sand wedge of some sort in case I go in a bunker. So let me just clear the table and I'll get that one in. Right, here's the sand wedge that I'm going to use. I think this is a very interesting club. I have featured it before. It came in that bag of odd clubs that I got. Arthur Young Sonning Golf Club, the professional, and it does have quite a bit of bounce on the sole, so it's clearly a club that can be used as a sand iron. If we get that round so you can see the bounce there. But on the sole, it has, rather than a wedge or something like that, it has a number 10. So I think this was at a time before wedges became commonplace. 9 was the putter, as we've seen previously in early sets. So 10 would be the logical next step for numbering. Dot face club, nice big toe on there, light brown ferrule with an ivory coloured top, and it has a leather grip, which I assume is the original. That just leaves the putter, and keeping to the coated shaft theme, I've got a Spalding putter. This one has the anvil cleat mark, which tells us that it was made in Scotland. This is the G model. So, hand forged, A.G. Spalding and Brothers, rustless. Nice face. We've got lines there, and then we've got a couple of lines with some dots framing those lines, the grooves there. It's a gem style putter, very well respected style. This one is a pyrotone shaft. I don't know whether you can make that out or not, but that is a sort of a celluloid rather than the enamel paint that I think all the other clubs we've looked at so far have been. And the grip on the club is an original leather grip, and it has a flat face on the front side. I think that's just two thin pieces of cane or something which have just put down the side of the shaft before the leather wrap is put on. And that's the putter then, and that concludes the clubs. I'll bring up the lofts for the clubs, and then in part 2 we'll go out and play them. Here are the lofts then, fairly standard for the time. Quite a strong 2-iron at 18 degrees, but then from the 3-iron a fairly steady progression with a bit of a jump at the 8-iron. Time now to discuss Tom Stewart the man and Thomas Stewart the golf company. Tom Stewart was born in Barry near Carnoustie in 1861, and there he trained as a blacksmith. He moved to St Andrews around 1894 and was apprenticed to Robert White, who was the most famous of the early iron cleat makers in the area. A few years later, Tom Stewart started his own cleat making business, and very soon after that took over the business and premises of Robert White himself when that went bankrupt. Tom Stewart soon became the most respected ironmaker in the area and made heads for most of the local club makers. The business grew and in time moved to Argyle Street, where it remained until his death and beyond. He adopted the pipe as his cleat mark around the end of the 1890s and registered it as a trademark in 1905. Many of the world's best players used Stewart irons, including old Tom Morris, Bobby Jones, Harry Varden and Francis Ouimet. The number of iron heads made by Tom Stewart is open to conjecture, but it's generally thought to be in the millions. Tom Stewart retired around 1930, just as the Hickory era was starting to come to an end, and he died in 1931. The business was carried on by his sons, Thomas, John and Malcolm. Stewart irons are regarded as among the finest by today's Hickory players, so his legacy continues. But what happened to the company after his retirement during the 1930s and beyond? As I've frequently commented, the 1930s is a bit of a golfing backwater as far as collectors are concerned, and the Tom Stewart company is equally lacking in details. The company continued to make heads for professionals to sell in their own shops, and no doubt they made clubs for other manufacturers too. But what the operation was like and how many people were employed is hard to say. One point that I have been trying to tie down is when the company ceased trading, or at least ceased to be independent. So if anybody can confirm one way or the other when it was and who took the company over, I'd be extremely grateful. Please comment below. But it seems that at some time, most likely in the 1950s, Stewart was acquired, perhaps by Spalding. While this is an easy conclusion to draw, the lack of hard evidence of a takeover or acquisition makes me wonder if Spalding were the first to actually acquire the Stewart name and forge. Let's look at the evidence. I don't have any golf magazines from the 1930s, so I can't say how much Stewart's advertised to the general public, but I imagine very little. This is one of the earliest adverts I found, and it dates to 1950, from a Swedish magazine. Their business in the 1930s seems to have been focused on supplying to club professionals rather than making a Stewart-named set of clubs. This is one of the few coated shaft Stewart clubs I've seen that doesn't have a club professional's name on it. As I've already said, as well as supplying to club professionals, Stewart's also supply to other club makers, and this brings us on to Spalding. Spalding had been established in the UK for many years, but for some reason in the 1930s they sold their forge at Dysart in Scotland, which made all their clubs that were produced in the UK, and they were generally stamped with an anvil cleek mark. After that they seem to have concentrated on assembling American-made heads onto UK-produced shafts. And this would make sense as import costs and duties would be reduced, so profits increased. But then, from Swedish magazine Svensk Golf, appears this advert, which as well as 2 American models, also lists a Henry Cotton model. Although there's no picture of a club, I have to assume that it's the one we looked at earlier in the comparison of 10 irons, also pictured here. And now we see the first clear evidence of a connection in that both Spalding and Stewart names appear on the club, although the Spalding name is in block capitals rather than the usual script. That makes me ask the question, did Spalding, without a UK factory as far as I can tell, ask Stewart's to produce the heads for them? At this stage I can see no evidence of Spalding having taken over Stewart's, and in fact adverts for Thomas Stewart begin to appear in the 1950s with no mention of the Spalding name, and Spalding also continued to advertise with no mention of owning Stewart's. I realise that this means nothing on its own, but it does lead me to believe, or at least until further proof becomes available, that both Thomas Stewart and Spalding were still independent at this stage. While searching for adverts, I chanced across what could turn out to be the biggest clue yet, and that was this notice in the Trade Professional and Greenkeepers Notes section of the July 1956 Golf Monthly magazine, which tells us that Jim Miller has had to have an enforced rest in hospital. Now I don't know who Jim Miller was, but to receive such a mention he must have been fairly high up in the company, and if whatever caused the hospital stay proved to be serious, such that he had to step down from Thomas Stewart's, could this have triggered the closure and sale of the company? I found no adverts by Stewart's from 1957 onwards. Spalding relocated to a brand new factory in Newtown Abbey, Northern Ireland in the early 1960s and re-entered the UK market with a flourish. For a brief time they seem to have retained the old Forgan works and sold Forgan clubs. They'd acquired the Forgan name at some time around 1960 or 1961, but they seem to have withdrawn all their Scottish operations around the mid-1960s and sold the Forgan works, and it would seem the Stewart works. Now I don't know if Spalding had acquired the Stewart name directly or if Forgan had acquired it earlier and it came to Spalding when they bought the Forgan name, but in any event the pipe cleek mark arose again at the Argyle Street works when the name of Swilken arose from the ashes left behind by Spalding's withdrawal, as we can see from this advert from 1964. And Swilken continued to use the pipe cleek mark for quite a few years on their clubs. That, I'm afraid, is as much as I've been able to discover about Thomas Stewart in the steel shaft era. A bit disappointing for one of the greatest iron makers that golf has known. I'll finish with a quick look at steel shafted irons I found by Stewart's. And I'm not going to include clubs stamped with just the club professionals' names in this, as there'd be just too many. First, we have the coated shaft club already shown, which I think dates to the 1930s. Then the Henry Cotton Spalding model, again we've already seen this, for which we have an in-production date of 1948, although I think it might have been in production earlier than that. Then a poor picture of the Argyle model. Have an advert for this from the 1950s, but again it may be earlier. Then the Cheetah model. I think that this may have been a model for sale through the Professional Golfers Cooperative Association. Next the Simile, which I think dates to 1949. An interesting set these. I'll put an extract from an ad from the time, which you can read by pausing the video to find out a little more about the concept behind the clubs. Then we have the Supreme, again an advert from the 1950s, but again possibly earlier. And finally the True Set Tourney, only a graphic for this one from a 1950s advert again. Earlier in the video I said that I'd talk in more detail about the True Temper shaft when we were looking at the 10 irons. On reflection, I think that this is such a big subject that a separate video dedicated to True Temper might be better. But for now, here are 4 shafts with the date of the club model to which they were attached. Well, as usual, I've spent far too long chattering and got myself sidetracked a couple of times. I'm going to wind the video up now, so thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you can join me in part 2, which will be released soon, where I'll take the clubs we've just reviewed to the course and find out how I get on with them. Bye!